Hello, I'm Daz, and welcome to American Civil War and UK History podcast. This presentation is available as a video on our YouTube channel or as a podcast from wherever you get your podcasts from. And if you're watching on YouTube, remember to hit that subscribe button and give us a big thumbs up. And check out our website at www.acwandukhistory.com for updates, blog posts, and links to all of our social media pages. A link is also available via the podcast description. And joining me today is Pete from Pete's Living History. Hello, Pete.
How you doing, Daz?
Yeah, so Pete has a really good TikTok page called Pete's Living History, and which we'll discuss later on in the podcast. But in today's episode, we are going to be discussing feeding the British Army during World War One, which is something that gets very overlooked. But before we get into that, Pete, can you please tell everyone how you first became interested in history?
Well, to start off, well, thank you very much, Daz, for inviting me on to this podcast. So I'm gonna try and make a boiled egg sound very interesting.
That's all right. Go for it.
So how did I get into it? I was kind of born into it, to be honest with you. I'm like yourself, Daz. I'm of that generation where we still had the Sunday afternoon war film, So we grew up watching all these old war films, and then you got the TV series like Sharp and all that sort of stuff as well. And my gran, bless her heart, she was a bit of an enabler, so she sort of saw my interest in it and got me into Dad's army and all that sort of thing. And obviously, growing up in the 90s, I was very aware that there was a world war. Because many grandparents either grew up during it or they served during it as well. And then when I got a bit older, I realised these films and TV series are based on real events. And that's when it sparked my interest properly, when I was probably about 12. And I found myself getting into living history when I was about 15 years old. And I joined my first group at 15, which was the American Infantry Preservation Society doing Vietnam, which I knew nothing about at the time. I knew there was a Vietnam War. I knew the Americans were involved, but knew nothing about it. So I thought doing it through living history would be the best way about learning about it. So that's what I did. Then the rest is history.
As they say, yeah. And that's a very similar story to me, because I joined the Sealed Knot in 2003. I wasn't really interested in the history side of it when I first joined, because you might have heard the stories, but it's booze and bash, as we called it. You got pissed, had a fight and went out and got pissed again. But that's what it was. And but I was the same. I was like, I need to know more about this. If someone asks me a question, I want to know the answer. So yeah, that's fantastic, mate. Thanks for telling us that. Okay, so let's talk about the British Army during World War One and how the logistics behind how they were fed and everything. So okay, so start off with how big a challenge was it to feed the British Army during World War One, Pete?
It was an enormous challenge to start off with. If we sort of put it into perspective, at the beginning of World War One, the Army Service Corps, who were basically the suppliers, their belts buttoned up tight round many trousers, so to speak. And at the beginning of World War One, there was about 6,500 in the Army Service Corps. Then by the end of World War One, there's about 325,000 in the regiment. So that shows how much it exploded in those 4 years. But we did have the edge on them, though, with motor transport and things like that. So it was a colossal complex operation the Army Service Corps had to cope with. But in 1914, even in 1914, the British Army did have the capability of being able to operate 30 miles from a railway head. So where most armies can't really function away from the railway head, so where all the supplies are being dropped off by rail, the British Army could do it because of the way they managed to adapt pre-war, because they knew a war was going to happen potentially in Europe. So it's all those years leading up to it. So they did have a head start in 1914.
And so okay, so again, the Western Front's huge, isn't it? So, supplying that, was there a good supply of like rail lines and that then, as you said?
Obviously, there was that railway infrastructure there, but then they had to build it. So engineers would have to come in to build up railway lines, and then there's obviously the narrow gauge railway as well, which would be the railway leading more up to the front line, and the roads. A lot of the French and Belgian roads weren't designed to take 3-ton lorries or thousands of marching troops. They were designed for horse and cart. So there was those difficulties as well. So iron roads would have to be made, or tarmac roads as we'll call them today. So so the infrastructure was kind of there, but it had to be developed throughout the course of the 4 years.
Yeah. So as the war went on, they sort of developed the roads, the road network, the rail network got better. So Pete, why was World War One such a turning point in military logistics and food supply?
It had never been done before on that scale. So I said earlier about how the British Army had the edge, particularly with motor transport. So at the beginning of World War One, the British Army had about 1,200 motor transport. So that's lorries, cars, which was far more than like France and Germany had, because they didn't really grasp the idea of it pre-World War One. But like I said, we had. Then put that into, again, with the scale of it, by the end of World War One, we went from 1,200 vehicles. So out of that 1,200 vehicles, that wasn't purely on the Western Front, that was worldwide. So out of that 1,200, about 200 of them were with the British Expeditionary Force in 1914. But then that will then explode to about 124,000 lorries and other vehicles by 1918. Again, that's global, but then on the Western Front, we're looking at about 100,000, maybe 115,000 vehicles. So it goes to show how much this unit has just exploded in 4 years, becoming one of the biggest regiments in the British Army. Again, and horses, but everyone in Europe is using horses. You know, at the beginning of World War One, we've got about 27,000 horses in the British Army. Again, that's worldwide. But then on the Western Front in 1914, we've got about 20 to 25,000 horses that have been sent over there. But then by 1918, we've got just over 400,000 horses. And that's just to pull horse-drawn vehicles with supplies and things like that.
That's mind-boggling. Wow.
It is, isn't it? Yeah. And by 1918, with the 100-day offensive, somewhere where the Germans lacked with their spring offensive in 1918, where their advance just collapsed, they just haven't the infrastructure with the supply and demand. British Army was capable of going 30 to 60 miles away from a railway head because they had all these vehicles and horse-drawn transport to get those supplies up.
That's the thing with World War One. You think of that first mechanical war, but really it's still, reliant on horse-drawn power.
Yeah, it's that sort of second industrial revolution, isn't it?
And even the Second
World War, world coming into the new, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Even the Second World War, they sort of rely a little bit on horse-drawn power as well, don't they? Or the Germans do, anyway.
Oh, the Germans did massively. Yeah, but it comes to the Second War.
Very interesting.
We're starting to get rid of our horses just in time for it to start. But yeah, Germans were massively dependent on it in the Second War.
Excellent. Okay, mate. So, who was actually responsible for feeding the army, and how was the system organised?
So, as I've already mentioned, it's the Army Service Corps. So, the Army Service Corps are the suppliers. So, anything you can think of regarding logistics, stores, transport, trains, everything of that nature is all down to them. They are the people dealing with that. And they've got about, depends on what part of the war we're looking at. So, if it's 1914, we've got about 120,000 men in France with the BEF in 1914. So they've got to supply them. But then when we come to the end of the war in 1918, there's about 2 million men. That's just Britain alone. And if you add the Commonwealth forces, that's 2.5 million. on the Western Front. So these blokes have got a lot of people to supply, and you can literally, I'll probably sit here for half an hour rolling off a really boring list of all the jobs the Army Service Corps were actually responsible for. But in the sake of feeding, the simplest thing would be just to say bakers. So the Army Service Corps provided the bakers. So all the Army's bread came from the Army Service Corps, provided by their own bakeries. Butchers, so all fresh meat was butchered by the Army Service Corps butchers. And obviously it's their transport and their supply depots that are storing and distributing the stores as well. And then when it comes up to the front line, to the battalions or the fighting units, it's down to those regimental cooks. So cooks didn't come from the Army Service Corps, although they were trained by them. So pre-war, the Army Service Corps trained the Army cooks. So all the Army cooks come from their battalions. So they were just cat badged. So if there were, I don't know, the Rifle Brigade, they would be badged up as Rifle Brigade because they would have actually joined that battalion as an infantryman, and that job as a cook would have come later, if that makes sense. But they're the blokes who are going to be physically feeding the men on the front line, are the battalion cooks, or the slop jockeys, as they became known as.
I love that. I think that's great. And you said about the Commonwealth soldiers towards the end. Were the British Army also responsible for feeding those Commonwealth soldiers too?
Yeah, so that they had their own versions of the Army Service Corps, so they'll have their own sort of entity of that, but it all falls down to the British to make sure that they're supplied as well.
Wow, that is a headache, isn't it? I mean,
it is. Yeah, it's a very complex beast.
And again, people just don't ever
as they go along as well.
Yeah, people just don't ever think about this. Don't think about logistics behind an army. Ever. It's crazy to think. Okay, can you walk us through the journey of a soldier's meal from farm and factories in Britain to the front line trenches, please?
Yeah, so depending on what your food source is, it'll obviously come from whoever's produced it. Like you said, either a tinning factory in the UK, or it's a potato that's has been farmed. That will all get acquired, so the procurers will buy that. That will get delivered. So just like a delivery service today for catering companies, those lorries will go to that depot, deliver it. That'll then get stored, and then it will go through it. Then it will then go through its distribution process. So either by lorry or by rail, it will make its way down to the south coast onto a ship, which will literally be a cargo ship full of food. But that will be its job, and it will then go to one of the major ports, being Calais, Le Havre, or Dunkirk. It will be taken off there, and then it will go into the Army Service Corps warehouses where it will be stored, and then it will be waiting for distribution, and it will then go on that path again, either by rail, horse-drawn car, or lorry. It'll then go further to the line, so it'll then go to then it'll go up to their divisions, and then when it gets to the divisions, it'll be put into stores again, where it'll be looked after. Then it'll be then distributed amongst who that needs to go to. So again, that will be thrown onto a lorry or horse-drawn vehicle. Could be narrow gauge railway as well if we're getting close to the front line, but that's literally the sort of route that's got to take to get itself to the front line.
And what sort of costs was involved in this?
Well, it's often referred to as the war of the biggest purse.
Yeah, it has to be, doesn't it? Crikey.
I saw a thing once where they tried to work out how much was being spent in modern terms, and it's in the billions.
Yeah,
it was when they tried working it out. And before the war, the army's always had this relationship with the government where the government would always be a bit frugal with the army on their spending. So the army's always been very good at making do with the money they've got. But then when World War I came along, they suddenly had this endless purse, because Britain at the time was extremely rich at the time. Like today, we wouldn't even be able to, think how rich Britain was at that time. But with this endless purse, they could do anything. They could take what they want where they wanted. It just wasn't a problem to them. It could be the most absurd place something needed to go to, and they go, "Yep, not a problem. Sign it off. Off it goes." So like, at one point, you'll get blokes with oranges. They're giving oranges to blokes in the front line. Those oranges have got to come from somewhere, haven't they?
And this is the thing. This is still time of empire, so this is it's quite it's interesting. Okay, so now, as you said, they go down to the ports, probably Dover, Southampton, all those sort of places. I would take it. Maybe even my hometown of Folkestone. I know that a lot of troops went from Folkestone.
Yeah, a lot of troops come out of Folkestone. That was a massive depot for blokes heading over there.
But of course they've got to cross the English Channel. So how vulnerable was the supply chain? And enemy, the enemy had submarines, didn't they? So tell us about that and how vulnerable these ships were.
Yeah, the U-boat submarine. So in 1950, yes, it was vulnerable. There's no getting away from that. You got this hidden predator. You got this hidden predator under the waves you can hit at any time at any place. In 1915, they were hitting ships, but through sort of diplomatic pressures, the Germans were very wary what ships they sunk. So those U-boat commanders had to be very sure that that was a merchant supply ship or somewhat of that nature, because what they didn't want to start doing was hitting civilian vessels, as in a not cruise ship, but a ship with passengers. And this is where things get a bit naughty in 1917, because the Germans turned around and said, no, anything's fair game. And subsequently, that will bring the Americans into World War One, because they're sinking civilian vessels without any thought. And that's when it does start getting very effective, especially in 1917, because they're like, anything's fair game. So they're sinking civilian transport ships, hospital ships, and obviously food and ammunition and things like that coming from America as well.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Very interesting. Yeah. Okay. So cooking and distribution. So where was the food actually cooked, and how close to the front line could kitchens safely operate?
So when they're actually on the front line, the cooks, or the battalion cooks, needed to be as close to the men as they possibly could, because they obviously, you can't, ideally you want them about 5 miles behind the lines where they can be sort of unhindered and get on with their job. Unfortunately, that just isn't the case, and they've got to be slap bang on the front line. So depending on how that sort of section of trench network is set up, as the crow flies, it probably isn't very far. So they could be a mile, maybe 2 miles behind the front line. But when you're walking through the zigzag of trenches, that mileage adds up. So for a bloke going from the front line to the rear to where their cooks are, he could be walking 4 miles, maybe a bit less. But like I said, it all depends on what the trench network in that area looks like. So these cooks are very much in the front line, and there's accounts from the cooks. There was one I remember where they actually made like a sanger, so it's almost like a fortification around their field kitchen, because they kept on getting pinned by German machine gun fire. So they made themselves this little barricade.
Getting shot while you're peeling the potatoes,
Exactly, and that's one of those things. They were subject to shellfire, because shellfire doesn't know if you're a cook or not. And in some instances, that's how some blokes became cooks, because the professional cooks got hit by the shellfire. Company commander comes up, goes, right, the company cooks are dead. We need a cook. You'll do. You can open a tin, can't you?
Oh God! No. I bet the whole regiment's like, oh no, not him.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh dear. Yeah, but I was going to say, how many people were actually killed in the line of cooking the men's food?
It's hard to tell on a statistic because their casualty rate would just be mixed in with the battalion.
Okay.
Usually, it will be something that be mentioned in a war diary that a company's cook got killed. Possibly, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. They just, like I said, because they're part of the battalion, and they're not a support arm of the battalion. They're like I said, they're if you're from the rifle brigade, you are the rifle brigade. Now that is your regiment. That's the regiment that you've always been in. So you're literally just one of their statistics if you got killed or wounded. So it is hard to tell how many actually got killed up on the front line. But yeah, they would have been a fair few.
Okay,
Absolutely.
so you said that obviously there's all these trenches, but what were the mobile field kitchens and why were they so important in development?
They were an excellent development. As you got your picture up on the screen. So yeah, so on the left you got the field kitchen, which is quite a new one, and it was very good. It had ovens, it had boilers on board. So that'll be for one company. So each battalion would have about four, and one would sort out an entire company. Now on the right, you got Old Faithful, which is the Sawyer stove, which was invented during the Crimean War in the 1850s. An excellent bit of kit, and they will be used side by side because there's some instances, like this poor bloke here, where he's having to use duck boards to get his feet out the water so he can cook the food for the lads up the line. So he's probably not that far away from the front line trenches. But in some instances, he just couldn't get close enough with those wagons. So you'll have to dig in a kitchen. And the Sawyer stove becomes absolutely perfect because the Sawyer stove is a universal stove. You can fry on it, you can boil on it. There was even attachments to have like a sort of oven on it, although they didn't really use it up in the front line. It was more boil, boil or fry, and it could burn anything as well. You got just completely sort of out of context from the Western Front, but places like Egypt, it can actually burn camel dung. It was a very versatile piece of kit. Old Faithful.
and so these mobile field kitchens. Have you been lucky enough to see any of these up close and personal? Because I don't think I've ever seen one at a reenactment or a living history event.
Yeah, so a World War One field kitchen. I've only ever seen a German one, and that's at Huge Crater Museum in Belgium, just by Ypres. They've got an original German one there, and I've seen a couple of World War Two German ones, which are a similar sort of concept. But Sawyer stoves, I've seen a few Sawyer stoves in my time, and I got to use one as well.
I was going to say, have you sat around it and had a few beers around it, and then, like you said, burnt your dinner around it?
yeah. We did a training event, and myself and my mate Chuckles. It's Chuckles who owns the Sawyer stove, and we actually took on the role of battalion cooks. So we actually produced meals from the time, all on the Sawyer stove.
Was the rest of the guys happy about that, or?
Yeah, they were. Yeah, I think they were more pleasantly surprised more than anything to what we managed to accomplish on it. I think they secretly thought we had the gas burners out the back.
I bet they did. Yeah, no, fantastic, mate. Fair play to you guys. Yeah. Okay. So as I was saying earlier, as you were saying earlier, a mile, into the trenches can take you forever. So how did food finally reach the men in the trenches during, and then when there was active fighting as well? That must have been difficult.
Yeah, so in the quieter times, you'll have the famous work party. So the voluntold men,
the
voluntold men would go and collect the food from the cooks. So there'd be obviously the lads who are sat there up on the front line. Platoon sergeant would come along and he'd go, right, you and you, off you go to the cooks and get the meal. So they'll then work their way through the trench system. They'll meet up with the cooks and they'll say what company they're from. Then it will be given to them in dixies. So it's just a metal pot with a great big handle and a little lid.
Yeah, good luck with that.
And that's literally how they'll take it up to the line. There's other inventive things. There are things like hay box to try and keep the food hot as well. But the things with the hay boxes, they were just too cumbersome. So a lot of the time, the blokes used to just get rid of the hay boxes. They just give us the pot. Yeah, so that was the main transportation method for them to get that up to the front line. Was
So
really
were the guys at the front running the book to see who could actually get the dinner there in one piece?
It's funny you should say that. Because there was an extract from a cook called, what was his name? It's Private Dolben, I think his name was, and he even says about the work parties coming up to him, especially when it's at night. And he goes, "Oh, the party have come up. They've taken the food off me." But then he goes, literally within minutes, I start hearing the clattering of lids and swearing because the lids are falling. Because where they're missing their footing on the duck board, you can hear the lids of the Dixies falling off, and they're swearing because it's probably fallen into some mud. And they just put the lid on top of the Dixie, and they're trying to navigate their way into the front line.
And when they get to the cook, they're like, "Oh, not stew again! For goodness' sake, how am I supposed to get that there?"
Yeah, especially when you're up on the line as well. Yeah.
That's really fun.
Food with grit today.
That's really, really funny. It's not funny to them at the time, but
he found it quite humorous. The way it sort of come across I think it's when it's making good of a bad situation. Yeah. I think it's like, it's probably not going to be good for those lads up on the line, but when you're hearing these blokes like knocking these lids off and they're getting really annoyed about it. And I think he probably did just chuckle to himself. Like, I'm glad I ain't doing that.
I mean, I've just got visions of, obviously, I'll take it you've probably seen Blackadder Goes Forth. And, they get a bit harsh up on some rations, don't they? And he's like, "Oh, sir, there's some mud out there. We can make coffee out of them," things like that. I've just got visions of them, all these guys dropping food on the floor and just picking it up and putting it back in with some extras.
Absolutely, and unfortunately, the cooks will get blamed for that as well because they're like, it'll be a bit gritty. If the lad has, dropped the lid into the mud and he's put it back on, obviously the mud's going to go into the stew or the curry, whatever he's got. And you're going to be sat there eating going, "Why has this got grit in it?" It's like, bloody cooks, they can't do nothing, can they? But it's not the cook's fault, it was the blokes who brought it up.
Just don't think about this. It's so interesting. Okay, let's talk about daily rations and what would a typical British soldier expect to eat in a normal day on the Western Front?
Well, in an ideal world...
Let's have the good news first.
Very well fed in an ideal world. So he'll eat about 3 times a day. He would eat. So he'd have his breakfast, which will usually be bread, cheese, bacon, and jam. Sometimes porridge as well. So porridge wasn't something that couldn't be provided for them. It depends if the cooks had it or not. And again, it's easily transported. Lunchtime or dinner, as they called it, would be, and it'd be wet. So when you look at the feeding on the front line, wet and mass feeding, that's what you got to keep on telling yourself. So stew is the order of the day. So you'll either be having stew or you'll have curry, which is stew, just so it's got curry powder in it. And then by the afternoon, you might have some like tidbit type things. But then in the evening, because most of the work's being done at night as well, especially from 1915 onwards, it just becomes a hive of activity at night. So around about midnight, you'll get your soup. And traditionally, it's pea soup because the army does get an allocation of dried peas. So you're going to have dried peas in a soup made into a soup. So that's what they're sort of eating sort of fresh 3 times a day. But then also you got your dry rations as well, which is your famous bully beef. You also got your Maconochie as well, which is tin stew, which became known as baby's heads because when you open the lid, all the fat had these like lumpy balls when you open the lid, and it reminded them of the top of a baby's head. Oh, God. But that would be in lieu of corned beef, though. So you might not necessarily get corned beef and Maconochie or Maconochie. That it'll all depend on what the supply is at that time. So that'll be partly like your sort of dry ration that you'd get. So it's
Yeah,
nice
and
and easy to get it up to you.
excellent. And I see here, like obviously this picture I've pulled offline somewhere, but did they have their own little burners as well to be able
They
to do their
did,
own little
yeah.
things?
Yeah, it's there's this sort of reenactorism, living historyism that every man had a Tommy stove, had a Tommy
Yeah,
cooker.
no, maybe they had one, between a few of them, maybe.
Yeah, it'd be that sort of
Yeah,
thing. So what it was a private purchase. So if you had the money to buy one, absolutely. They come in all various different forms. Some were like a gelignite, like the one in the photograph. Some were like little blocks as well, very similar to what hexamen became for the British Army in more modern times. But then by sort of 16, 17, the British Army then realised, oh, hang on a minute, these blokes are going out buying these. Shouldn't we be issuing them? So by 1917, they do go on to the issue. So this is where the famous Tommy cooker, appears. So no longer are they having to buy them from the canteens behind the line. They're actually going to start getting issued them, which is an absolute godsend to them because food seldom comes up to the line hot. Same with tea as well, because the cooks would make them a batch of tea. So again, if it's made it up to the line of the Dixie, if the carrying party haven't swashed it everywhere.
yeah. Oh dear. He's probably. I've got visions of them wringing it out of their sleeves back into the.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Or they put it into a petrol tin as well. That was another thing.
Oh yeah, that'll get you there. But I
Yeah.
mean, you get high on it tastes a bit funny, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah.
Anyway, adds to the flavour, I suppose. Puts hairs on their chest.
Yeah, adds the tang.
So, how many calories did a soldier need, and why was their diet so heavy compared to civilian life?
So, in an ideal, again, in their ideal world, a British soldier would be on about 4,500 calories a day, if not a few more. And that's just for his combat effectiveness, especially in trench warfare. Because it's if you're on a work party at night, it's very manual work. You're vetting parapets, you're doing your work parties, as well as you could be going out into no man's land where you're going to be crawling on your belt buckle out in no man's land, maybe do some repairs on the wire, or you might go onto a raiding party. So you're burning a lot of calories. Maybe it's not so much during the day itself. Especially from again sort of 15 onwards, because you become a bit of a nocturnal animal. So a lot of your work's going to be done at night, and you're going to be burning a hell of a lot of calories. And then when we come up to actual offensive, when you're going to be doing some war fighting, so to speak, you're going to be shedding loads of calories. You've got to get to them German front lines. You've got to fight the Germans, potentially hand to hand as well. When you get into those front line trenches, then you've got to clear those trenches as well. And then obviously we got the prospect of a mobile war, because it was a mobile war in 1914. It weren't till sort of November time. They started to actually dig in properly, and it becomes this stalemate that becomes famous during the First World War. So the first few months of World War One, very mobile. The blokes are running around everywhere. And then at the end of the war, for the 100-day offensive, they're doing exactly the same again. It becomes a mobile war again. So they're burning a hell of a lot of calories.
Okay, so and how did the food quality vary depending on the situation at the front?
So it's all about sort of supply and demand. So if there's a lot of shelling going on, that can obviously affect the food coming up. So especially the fresh food, because artillery fire is going to reach, especially if it's big guns, it's going to get about 3 to 4 miles behind the lines. So those cooks who are only, as the bird flies, they're only going to be about a mile, maybe a mile and a half from the front line trench as the bird flies. That could become a massive problem, because obviously those food supplies aren't going to get to them on the front line. So they have to break out the dry rations. So that's where they're going to have to start living on the tin stew and the corned beef and the army biscuit and tins of jam to keep them going, because it's very dense, but that's what's going to keep them going. But then in an ideal world, they are going to be eating those, they are going to be eating 3 times a day. They're going to have their breakfast, they're going to have their lunch, and they're going to have their supper, which is, a bit of bread and some soup and that. But it's all down to what's going on at the time, or it could just be purely fluke as well. So, you got your cook who stood there. He's got a fresh meat ration, or he's using the field service ration. So he's opened up all those tins of stew and he's just threw them all into a pot to make a big all-in stew. So he's throwing in rice because they got rice as well as part of the ration. So they can be throwing a load of rice in there, a load of peas in there, as in dried peas. But then suddenly a gas attack happens. The food's spoiled because it's now chemically contaminated. So that food's got to be thrown away now, which then through that, they go, well, that's our food for today. So what we're going to do? Well, we can either split food up. We can't because the other companies are saying they're affected the same. They're in the same gas attack. But what isn't? Oh, yeah, these boxes of tins of stew and the boxes of bully beef, they're not contaminated because they're self-contained in a tin. So get them up to the lads. They'll have to eat that instead. But yeah, there's also food quality as well. So, but that won't be the fault of the army cooks. That's the fault of its transportation method. So this would have happened while it was in the charge of the Army Service Corps. So this could be meat or vegetables that have not been stored correctly as well, because it may have ended up at a warehouse that hasn't got proper decking. So like it's something they call dunnage. I love that word, dunnage. Yeah. But dunnage was basically wood. So it'd be the wooden pallets that the food would have to sit on because everything would need to be raised off the ground. So it might have been that it's been sat on the ground for a while, or it ended up at one of the distribution points near the front line, but it's been laying on the floor too long, especially when it comes to meat. They could have just thrown it off the side of the wagon, waiting for it to be picked up, and it's been spoiled. I mentioned Dolben earlier on, who was a battalion cook. He mentioned that they got some fresh meat up to the front line. Obviously, they broke it out the packaging, which would be like cheesecloth that it's been wrapped in. And as soon as they opened it, they could smell it. They went, "Oh, this is on the turn. This is," and they weren't. No, they weren't. They weren't horrible people. They weren't like, "Oh, sod it, we'll just throw it in the pot." Yeah, we got it now. They're like, "No, this ain't right. No, this is defective stock." It's like a restaurant today. What's the chef's going to do if he's got his delivery of meat that's turned up and it's all on the turn? What's he going to do? He's going to send it back, and that's exactly what the battalion cooks were doing. But they used the quartermaster. So they've got the battalion quartermaster who deals with all supply within his battalion. They got him over. He had a look at it and he had a sniff of it. He condemned about half of it, as in half of the delivery, and then he told them to wash it. He goes, wash it in. I'm trying to think of the name of the stuff now. It's permanate. Yeah, permanate of. Hang on, I did write it down. That's it. Oh, Potter. That's it. So, and what the quartermaster did, he told them to wash the meat down, and they washed it down with permanate of potash, which is basically a disinfectant and a chemical I think you find now in athlete's foot cream. But the QM, he turned around and said, right, wash it in that, rinse it all off, wash it in that, because that's a disinfectant, wash it in that, rinse it off, and send it up to the lads. That's the best.
And again, it's the poor bloody cook that gets it in the neck.
Exactly. Oh. So, like, what spices you got? And that's, I think that day they probably made it into army curry that day. I think.
Yeah. Let's see if anyone noticed. Yeah.
Exactly.
And, okay, mate. That's really cool. Life in the trenches. What were the realities of eating under trench conditions? Mud, rats, shellfire, and all of that stuff.
It becomes a hindrance. You're trying to eat your food, and then you got a few shells coming over, or worse, a gas attack. And it becomes a little bit of tit for tat, because sometimes the Germans would know what time of day that the lads could be eating and things like that. Because especially from 1915 up in the Ypres sector, the Germans have got the high ground pretty much all the way around. And they can see what they're doing. So if the observers can see the blokes are now chowing down on their afternoon meal, they're right, send some gas over there. then, because it's all about breaking the morale of the men, isn't it? Because after that, their food's now been contaminated. They've got nothing else, and they might not be able to get anything to them for the rest of the day either. So yeah, it becomes a hindrance, and then I'll say you're sat there, you got your nose deep in your mess tin, and suddenly a shell goes off, and all the spoil ends up going into your stew as well. You got to try and pick it out, and it's I've got to eat it because I'm hungry, aren't I? I'm not going to eat anything else, So yeah, it becomes a little bit of a challenge, but again, it's just part of that day-to-day life of operating up on the front line. It just became sort of not. I wouldn't say it became second nature to them. It just became something they got used to in those circumstances.
Yeah, and I mean you've mentioned all of these, conditions and things going on. So how often were soldiers actually able to get that hot meal? And of course, how much did that matter to their morale, getting that warm meal inside of you?
It mattered a lot to them, especially in really rubbish weather. So if it's like, the famous Passchendaele rain, you're soaked wet through, all you want is a decent hot meal just to perk you up a little bit. And it was like, and the army, what they'd try and do, or even on a battalion level, they needed to give them at least something hot once a day if they could. That was their objective of the day. If they managed to give them a hot meal that day, that day's been a good day. Because some days they can't. There's instances where blokes have gone about a week in the front line and they've not had one hot meal. It's all been just sent up to them in tins or whatever, because it's all dependent on the situation of the time. But also, the hot food doesn't really come up hot anyway, so they've got to warm it up themselves. So, like these lads are doing here in the photograph, they had the Dixies come up and they fashioned themselves a brazier out of a bucket. They put a bit of heat back into it, put a bit of heat back in there to perk them up a little bit. Yeah, because in some instances, that only hot thing that they're going to have that day is their cup of tea. That could be the only hot beverage they're going to have, and and for them on that front line in them conditions, they needed something hot because they'll just get miserable very, very quickly.
Yeah, and are there any first-hand accounts of men describing their meals?
Yeah, it's a very mixed affair. So it's very what's the word? So it's more. So what you find more is them just generally moaning about it. So it's just blokes moaning. That's literally what a lot of it is most of the time. But what a lot of them tend to agree on is how atrocious the tin stew was. So the baby's heads that I mentioned earlier on. I've got one here actually, which is, through the stuff that I've found through the years, we've got Captain Graves, who spoke about Maconochie, or baby's heads. He says it's revolting cold, but just about tolerable hot. So that shows how much they hated the tin stew. And like the bully beef as well, they didn't really like it, but it was more than anything, what their gripe was the monotony of the food they were eating up on the front line, because the cooks didn't really jazz it up. Because end of the day, food on the front line, it's not to, it's to sustain the body. It's not to sustain the body and soul. It's literally to put calories and vitamins in you. That's what they needed you. It weren't about enjoying a nice meal in that respect. But if it's hot, all good. But what you're being given is literally just to fuel your body and to get you through the next 12 hours to your next feed.
Yeah. I mean, you've mentioned it a few times, but bully beef has become almost legendary. And what exactly was it, and why do you hear so much about it?
Well, it becomes the backbone of the British Army as a preserved ration. So bully beef is beef, and it's a corned beef or style of corned beef. I think I've had fresh corned beef before. It looks nothing like it does out of the tin. but it's very calorie dense. There's a lot of salt and other things that go into it. But it's almost like a solid pate. It's sort of the only way to describe it. And that would come from Argentina as well. The vast majority of our corned beef was coming from Argentina during World War One.
Oh wow!
And was you think of the millions of tins that made it across the Atlantic to get to the Western Front. Again, it's that war of the longest purse. So right, we get it all from Argentina. Same with the beef. Most of our beef was coming from Argentina as well, all frozen. So they'd slaughter it in Argentina, put it into freezers because they had freezers on the cargo ships, put them into the freezers on the cargo ships because obviously it's more space with the slaughtered animals. And then they'll just unload it at Le Havre, Calais or Dunkirk. Yeah, but yeah, the Argentinians were providing pretty much the vast majority of our beef during World War One.
Wow, I never knew that. Oh, interesting. Okay, so again, there's another one here. So what were hard biscuits? Of course, I know what they are because they look very similar to something that I was fed in the 1860s, or iron rations. And where were soldiers expected? To rely on them?
Yes, the famous jawbreakers. Yeah, they go by many names. Hardtack. And it's exactly the same stuff that you'd have experienced while doing your American Civil War stuff. It is literally a bread substitute. That's what it is. It's been used by militaries for a good best part of 400 odd years. And that's literally what it is. It's a bread substitute. It's literally flour, salt, and water with the moisture baked out of it for it to have a prolonged life. And it's basically be given to the soldier in lieu of bread. So as a daily ration, you'd get probably about 4 of them per day. You would, and that sort of equivalent to like half a pound or something like that, half a pound of biscuit. And what you're saying about the dry rations is they'll go up into the line with them as a form of an emergency ration. So they did actually have an emergency ration tin, which was like a concentrated like chocolate and beef bouillon thing, which could only be opened on the directive so it could only be ordered. It could only be opened under the orders of an officer. So they're very seldom used. You do find like archaeologists will find them now and again while they're doing the excavations on the Western Front. These little cylindrical sort of tubes. But this ration is their dry. So the dry ration, they will go up into the line with a dry ration. So there'll be like say 4 biscuits, a tin of bully, or a tin of stew. Probably they might give them some peas as well, so they get a ration of dried peas, a ration of rice, a tin of jam, but that'll be a tin of jam for the section, not just for the individual. So that will just go into his haversack for safekeeping until they're told they need to break it out. So the reason why they're taking these dry rations, or we'd probably perceive it more today as a 24-hour ration pack. So if you want to look at that. In that sort of instance, it's probably like the very early beginnings, like the grandfather of the 24-hour ration pack. That is in case the cooks can't provide the meal. So what I said earlier on about barrages, gas attacks, things like that, if there's a situation where these men can't get a feed and they need a feed quickly, then the officers would turn around and say, right, go into your haversack, get your haversack rations out, because they've already got it in there. So they've already got an emergency meal just in case they need it. But obviously, as soon as they've eaten it, they'll have to indent for more to be replenished in there. But this would also be issued to them on the attack as well. So those famous battles, the Battle of the Somme, the Battle of Passchendaele, all these blokes would have been issued with one of these as well, because they don't know when they're going to actually get food to them. So that's when they'll be expected to have them. So they'll be expected to have it in a sort of a case of an emergency, in a sense, or when they're on the assault. So physically going up there into the German frontline trenches and giving them the good news.
Yeah, and like you said, if they got stuck out there, it'd be, is there stories of men getting stuck out in no man's land and
all the time
surviving on this?
Yeah, of course, yeah. You'll get the lads who have been wounded, especially on an offensive, You know, you got lads who have not been picked up by the stretcher bearers, or the stretcher bearers just went straight past them, not realising they're there, and things like that. And they're trying to make their way back. You know, and it also becomes a bit of a lifesaver as well, because, you know, he's got something to sort of nibble on out in no man's land. Not so much for the trench raiders, because the trench raiders would literally just be bare minimum when they went in on their trench raids. So those lads who'll get separated, they'd be lucky if they had a water bottle with them, because they wouldn't carry a water bottle, because obviously the swashing of a water bottle could give them away while they're going across no man's land, you know, depending on what job they're doing. So yeah, but you do hear about blokes being separated at night. And obviously, when they get back, sometimes they could be bloody starving the time they get back, because it could have took them hours and hours to get back into the friendly lines. But yeah.
Okay, mate. So how did troops? Because again, this is quite bland and boring, isn't it? But like you said, it's essential. Did they adapt or improvise to make these rations more edible?
They did, yeah. If they had the money, that was the thing. So they would go to what was known as the dry canteens. So a dry canteen is basically like you'd go down to your local convenience store, and these things would operate behind the front line. Very much like a convenience store. You could walk in there and pretty much get anything that you want. So they'll pick up things like tins of golden syrup, Worcestershire sauce. So a lot of these things are still available on our shelves today. You know, that bottle of Worcestershire sauce, the Liam Perrins. It's got to be Liam Perrins. You know, and also you got the different relishes as well. You got something called Yorkshire relish, which was very similar to Liam Perrins. And then obviously you got herbs and spices as well. You know, you could, like, their version of, like, so where we would use, say, Tabasco sauce today, they'd have cayenne pepper. That was their Tabasco sauce, and mustard as well. You can buy mustard. So you buy your Coleman's, again, still on the shelves today. Get yourself a pot of dried Coleman's. You got to mix with water, or a jar of it that's pre-made. So yeah, and then you also got the locals as well. So they're trading with locals. But the thing is, these little niceties that you're buying behind the front line, they're only going to last you so long on the front line, because you could be up on the front line for about a month. So you got to think, you're eating 3 times a day. That's a lot of food you're going to take up with you if you're going to try and supplement it yourself. And then obviously for the officers as well, like the officers would self-cater. So they would go to places like Fortman Mason, Harrods, household names even today still, where they'd get their officer hampers. So everything the officer needs while he's in the front line. So he's got all these tinned goodies and things like that from Harrods, all these gentleman outfitters and all the rest of it. So yeah, it's quite interesting when you're looking at how they're supplementing it. And the locals as well. You know, once the lads go on leave, when they're on their R&R, they're eating egg and chips. You know, you go and get ham, egg and chips from, you know, the local calf down the road. And some of that becomes famous in the UK. You know, the reason why, you know, egg and chips or ham, egg and chips becomes so famous in the UK, even today, as one of those comfort meals, is because the First World War soldiers brought it back with them in that sense. It was something they got very accustomed to, and it was very cheap for them to buy while they're behind the line as well. And probably swashing it down with a sweet glass of wine as well.
Yeah, I bet they were. Yeah, but I mean, you know, if you'd been through what they've been through, you know, like you said, they're stuck out on that front line for a month. It's going to be quite comforting to have something like that, isn't it? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about tea and what role that plays in the British trench life, you know, and of course rum as well. Sorry.
So, as I said earlier, tea is, you know, that could be your only hot drink of the day. You know, tea was so important to the British soldier of World War One. They were tea monsters. They loved tea. So, trench tea was notoriously strong and sweet. He had a very sweet tooth, did the Tommy of World War One. So, like, you get your sugar ration each day as well, and also you get your tea leaf ration. So you wouldn't be giving it in a tea bag. it was literally just given to you in your hand.
Yeah.
So you'd hope to have some sort of container to put it in, or you got to put it in your
Oh
pocket.
no.
Yeah, your couple of ounces a day when it comes up to you. But yeah, it was incredibly important. Like I said, it became notoriously sweet, strong and sweet, because they literally just take the handful of tea leaves, throw it in the cup, and hope for the best. And the milk they're using is condensed milk, because obviously you're not really going to get much fresh milk up on the front line, but you are going to get a lot of condensed milk. And obviously condensed milk's very, very sweet, but then they're thrown in their sugar ration as well, so it becomes very, very strong and very, very sweet. But they're also drinking things like cocoa as well. So if you want, so that's basically hot chocolate, as what we'd perceive to be hot chocolate today, where we'll have the instant hot chocolate powder. But if you want to have a Tommy experience, just get the cocoa powder that's used for baking. That's exactly what it is. So if you want a World War One hot chocolate, just get a jar of cocoa that's used for baking cakes, and mix that up with water and throw loads of sugar in it, maybe some condensed milk again. Like I said, they love sweet things. I loved it.
Is that how you get through the long winter nights, mate?
It is pretty much, yeah. I live like it's 1960.
Nice, good on you.
Yeah, you're privileged that I've got the light on today, actually. Usually I'm sat here by candlelight.
I love it. I think you're great. Anyway, mate, let's talk about something that's really important to the soldiers, and that is obviously a rum ration. And, you know, a rum ration is something that you hear a lot of, particularly with the Navy, the British Navy anyway. But again, so is this something that they get in the trenches?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Like you said, it's made famous by the Royal Navy, but the British Army was being issued rum as well. It is the famous rum jar, the SRD jar, seldom reached destination, as they called it, which stood for Service Rum Depot. Very strong, potent stuff. It'll strip the enamel off your teeth, but it was good for you.
You go blind. Yeah,
go blind, lose your sense of smell and taste.
Well, that's probably a good thing in the trenches.
Yeah, it's so you'd get one ration a day. So you'd get one rum ration today, and that'll be done in the presence of your platoon commander. If we're talking from an infantry perspective, so your platoon commander will walk along with the platoon sergeant. So the platoon sergeant will be the one issuing the rum. So this is where we hear all these jokes and songs and things like that the sergeants drinking all the rum and things like that, because they were in charge of the rum. You see, but it was done under the watch of an officer, and it was actually a parade. Believe it or not, the issue of rum was actually an official parade. So once the lads have lined up, they've got their shot of rum in their enamel cup, or they've put it in their mess tin. Doesn't matter, as long as they've got a vessel of some description. They're going to get about 35 millilitres. That's usually about the size of a rum ration, unless it's a special occasion where you'll get double rum, and then we're looking at about 70 millilitres of rum being thrown into your vessel. And then as soon as you've had that, you've got to drink it in front of the officer. You've got to down it in one. You couldn't sip it. It just had to go straight down in one go. And then you had to tip your cup upside down to show the officer that you've not been retaining rum. So you couldn't save it, because what they didn't want the blokes doing was saving the rum. So they had, say, a pint of rum, and they had their own little private party. Yeah. But it was so important, was rum, especially in the winter.
Yeah.
Because usually that will come out after stand 2. So once they've done dawn stand 2, the rum's broken out to get the lads going, especially in the winter as well. Imagine that you had a really cold, rubbish night, minus temperatures, with rubbish cold weather kit, and then suddenly dawn comes and the rum comes out. You know, it's going to warm you up. It's going to give you that little burst of morale as well. But obviously that's not for everybody, because you did have the teetotalers as well. So obviously the teetotalers won't be drinking rum because there was a thing called the pledge. Because at the time, leading up to the First World War, you had the temperance movement. You know, they were anti-everything fun, as the Tommies used to say. So you could actually join the army by signing something called the pledge. And what that was is that you would sustain from drink for the duration of the war. So for those men, usually they'd get lime juice So yeah, so in lieu of rum, they get a bit of lime juice. But then if you've got, but there's also instances actually where the thing was the lime juice came in the same bottles as the rum, so the SRD jars were exactly the same. So there was a few occasions where these blokes were all lined up, looking forward to their 35 millimeters of brown goodness, and suddenly a load of green comes out of it because it's lime juice. Because there's been a mess up in the admin in the supply chain, and instead of them getting rum, they've been given pure lime juice. But obviously they're not going to get scurvy anytime soon. But it's not a good day in the trenches when the lime juice ends up going into their cups. But it was also known in some instances that some colonels, teetotaling colonels, who didn't like their men drinking, would say no rum for them. They'll have lime juice instead. But those colonels weren't very popular, obviously.
No, I bet they wasn't.
Especially when it comes to the hard drinking, hard smoking, and everything else British soldier of World War One.
The rum ration is very British, a very British unique thing, isn't it? It goes back for hundreds of years. And the fact that they're still doing this during World War One, it's just like, you don't really hear of other armies doing the rum ration, do you?
You don't, not really. Yeah, it's so by the time World War One comes along, it's kind of a tip of the hat to an old tradition. Because how it all sort of originated is, back in the days where water was toxic, really, fresh water being hard to come by in general. Was that alcohol was part of your pay? You might get like 5 pints of beer a day as part of your pay, and obviously through the Victorian era that decreases. Obviously, water purification becomes a hell of a lot better and things like that. And by the time World War One comes along, that 35 milliliters of rum is that last sort of salute to that old way of soldiering.
Now, let's talk about if you've got special dietary needs, or you're even there's some kind of religion. You've got a religion that you follow, requirements. Are they even taken into account?
Yes and no.
I would have thought you'd have just said no. But
yes question, no. It's a yes and no answer, really. So they are aware that there's vegetarians. Vegan definitely isn't a thing. Then they just sort of graphed the concept of what a vegetarian was. Yeah. But they're kind of out of luck. So it was a case of they just got with the program or didn't. Because vegetarianism it's not a new thing, It's like, when was vegetarianism invented? Oh, it was invented then. No, it's obviously it's one of these ways of life that's probably been around for hundreds of years, but never on a large scale because of how food was viewed back then as well. So for the vegetarians, it was very, very hard. They either just had to, go, what, I'm just going to eat meat for the next whatever amount of years that I'm here for. But then you do find some that will try and make their own arrangements in the sense of, they will pick around it. There's that old joke. You got the vegetarian option. Yeah, just pick around the meat, mate. But they'll do things like that. And then when they're behind the line, obviously they can find things for themselves. You can go to that cafe where you can just get egg and chips instead of bacon or ham and egg and chips. So they can, from a military perspective, they're not really being catered for in that respect. From a religious point of view, the only religion that exists in the British Army is the Church of England.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
But obviously by that point they accepted that there is Catholics and there is Methodists as well. So you do have the chaplains, you do have Catholic chaplains, Church of England chaplains, Methodist chaplains. I think there's a Baptist ones. I can't remember off the top of my head. But what the second religion was to Christianity in the UK was Judaism. Mm-hmm. That was the second religion. So the way the army sort of dealt with it was there's only one religion really, mate. So you just got to get on with it. But if you was in that fortunate position to be from a regiment with a lot of Jewish men in it, that's where things will change for you. Because your battalion, well, the army would realise very quickly, look, there's 200 blokes here. You know, you've got 200 Jewish lads. There is something that can be done for them. So whoever, say, is a spokesman for them would go to the cook sergeant and say, look, sergeant, this is what we're allowed to eat. This is what we're not allowed to eat. This is how it must be prepared, etc., etc. And usually the cook sergeants are like, yep, okay, well, you tell me how I need to do it and I'll just get on with it. But then if you're, again, in one of those regiments where you have the luxury of a rabbi, because rabbis are now allowed in the British Army. So at the turn of the 20th century, rabbis were allowed to join the chaplains department. But some regiments just wouldn't have rabbis. But if you had a rabbi, oh, you was laughing, because that rabbi would turn up to the quartermaster and the cook sergeant and tell them this is how it's going to be, and that's how it is. So, so in that respect, it was a yes. So that's what I mean by it's a yes and no answer. But then when we look to, say, the Indian Army, for Indian troops, they were pretty much self-contained. You know, they knew what their dietary needs and requirements were. And then back in the UK, there was a hospital pretty much for Indian troops. So their dietary requirements were met, you know, because that's the thing when they say about, you know, the old Empire Army was all bigoted and everything like that. The British Army and the Empire Army were very socially aware of the soldiers within those Commonwealth armies, to very, very minute details as well. So yeah, so for the Indian Army, they sorted themselves out in that respect, but the British Army, they just weren't interested really in that respect.
But again, you saying that about the Indian armies, you know, their morale counts as well. You want healthy, fit soldiers fighting on the front line, so you're going to do what you can to make sure that their life, you know, why they're serving in the British Army.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is, you know, it's, you know, I'm not saying there wasn't anyone from India serving in the British Army at that time, because there would have been. You know, if you're coming from say somewhere like London or Southampton or something like that, somewhere where there's a port, you know, there could be an Indian soldier serving in the British Army. But unfortunately, he's probably going to be the only man there, so they're not going to cater for him. But if you're behind the line and he sees some Indian troops at their catering wagon, at their field kitchen, getting their food, he'll go up to his platoon commander or company commander and say, look, can I go and get my dinner over there, please? And that company commander isn't going to say no. He goes, yep, absolutely, because he understands. Again, you know what I mean? He understands what his dietary requirements are. Although they can't accommodate him, there is some people over there that can accommodate him on this occasion. So he'll just write him a chit. Go, yeah, here you go. Here's your chitty. Off you go. Enjoy your dinner. See you in half an hour, whatever. And he will go over there with his chitty and have his meal with the Indian troops, and then he will come back and off he goes again.
Nice. Okay, so let's talk about parcels from home and what that meant to the soldiers, and what kind of food did they value the most?
Anything sweet.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you've got that boring diet, like you said earlier on.
Absolutely. So sweets. So this is also one of those interesting things at this time in history, that sugar becomes very, very available to a wider range of people by the early 20th century. So things like chocolate are starting to become affordable. They're still expensive, but they're more affordable than they were 20 years beforehand. So you've got things like chocolate bars, sweets. Again, the sweets, like you'll find some of these sweets up on our shelves in the shops today. You know, wine gums, always a favourite. So you got your wine gums, licorice all sorts, another favourite as well. Jelly beans, jelly babies. So it's a lot of traditional British sweets that we still enjoy today. They were being sent from home, or they were buying them in the canteens behind the line. So yeah, so anything sweet. Cakes was another one. So this is where the famous trench cake comes from as well. So a lot of people think that trench cake came from the trenches. Well, it didn't. It was what it was. It was actually published in a British newspaper because all the mums and wives were getting letters from their sons and husbands saying, well, thanks for the Victoria sponge, mother. It was quite nice what was left of it. It's been smashed up in the post. So they wanted something that's substantial. So they published the trench cake. So it was a very robust cake that could be sent on long journeys. So you've got blokes in, say, Mesopotamia or Salonika later on in the war, just serving in Africa. But also the Western Front, it's not going to get battered around on that Channel crossing. So it's something that's very robust and long lasting as well. So that's where trench cake comes from. But if you're on the Western Front, you can have stuff like bread pudding, So bread pudding's quite robust. If you make it very stodgy. And then you get things like tinned food as well. So you might get like a tin of sardines sent to you and things like that. And biscuits, that's another one. They love a biscuit. They'll either be a packet of biscuits or homemade biscuits. What they're being sent isn't out of the ordinary because and condiments as well. So the same things that they're buying the line can also be sent to them as well. So with the post when they learned very quickly the postal service was exceedingly good for the Western Front. So, say it could be anywhere in England. You could be in, I don't know, let's just say Birmingham, Manchester, wherever. It doesn't matter where you are. Any place that you are in Great Britain during World War One, if you sent a parcel or a letter to somebody who's on the front line on the Western Front, it would take 48 hours to 3 days to reach him.
Wow.
And you think by 1918 you got 2 million men just in the British Army alone on the Western Front, and a letter is literally going to take 2 days to get to you, if not 3. Obviously, this also depends on the situation at the time. But if the post's going well, it will be with you within 3 days, and this is why they started sending things like Victoria sponges over to them because when they worked out how quick the post was, stuff wasn't going to go off. Just it was going to get battered about in the box.
And again, I know we've mentioned that morale time and time again, but again, being away from home for so long, getting these parcels so quickly as well. I mean, that must have been a real morale booster. I mean, the day that they got the post must have been the best day on the planet,
Oh, definitely. And it's like you just couldn't comprehend it today, could you? With post today, it's like it could take a week sometimes for a first class post to get to you, can't it? Yeah. And it's like they're sending these millions of parcels and letters across the English Channel to all these places on the Western Front. It's just taking 3 days for them to do it. It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's mind blowing. It is absolutely mind blowing. But again, it's a credit to the logistic move of what they were doing then as well.
And I know you've mentioned this a little bit earlier on as well about, the soldiers did complain about army food at the time, but how did they reflect on it a little bit later on after the war, maybe?
Like when they're complaining about it, it's mixed emotions. I think when they in their later years or their twilight years, when they're looking back on it, they saw the monotony in it. So you got the monotony of what they're eating. And the thing is, it's like, what do you remember more? Do you remember something that's good or something that's bad? So you can have a really good meal, but that's easily forgotten. But you always remember the worst meals that you've had. So when you see these old veterans, when you see them in these interviews in the 1960s, when they're saying, no, the food was rubbish, didn't like it, it was horrible, I was starving all the time, because they're remembering back to those horrible meals that they were having. But then on the other hand, you got the comfort side of it as well, because if you're in the UK or you're behind the lines, you're eating normal food behind the lines, so you've just come off the front line, you've been up there for a month, eating the monotonous food, And then suddenly you come back behind the lines. You're 8 miles behind the lines. You're in relative safety. And you sit down into a cookhouse. You've got a plate, a knife and fork, and the cooks have put on something like steak and chips, or or something really familiar to them, something like bacon pudding or something like that. A good hearty meal that they're very familiar with, and they'll sit there and they'll remember that. They'll be like, "Oh yeah, I remember that. We were up on the line, we come off, and and they had steak and kidney pudding. Oh, it was lovely. It was." Because it's that thing. They went through that trauma of that month. Because remember, being on that front line, you're up on the line for 30 days. It's not just 30 days, but that's 30 nights as well of trauma of being up there on that front line. Now you've come back and you've now eaten something that your mum or your wife could have made for you, Yeah. And it's bringing those memories of home back from a very simple meal like that. But there's also innovation as well, where those fond memories where lads are clubbing together up on the front line. They're going, right, who's got what? I've got a tin of sardines as well. Well, you can throw that over the side. Don't want that. Right, what you got? Oh, I've got this tin of whatever. Oh yeah, that'll do. Oh, what you got? Oh yeah, I've got that. Well, we got some Worcestershire sauce as well. Okay, what we'll do is we'll put that sort of together. We'll mix that up when the stew comes up. We'll mix that together and we'll just share it out amongst us. And yeah, that's all right. And then it's that camaraderie build up as well. So it's that sort of thing that they'll start thinking about. Then there's also the funny stories that come out of it as well. There was a group of lads who wanted to buy a chicken off of a French woman. That was her profession, was like selling and cooking chickens. Now the Canadian Army were on far much more money than the British Army, believe it or not. And soon as the British soldiers would go into an area where there was Canadians or even Australians, the prices would be ridiculous. They wouldn't be able to match the prices when they went behind the line to go and do these supplement rations. And these group of mates decided that they wanted a chicken. They're like, right, we'll have a chicken, we'll cook it up, and we'll have that. That'll be very nice, wouldn't it? Oh, how luxurious, because poultry is very expensive as well. That's something like, how convenient is the chicken today? Now we just pop down to our local supermarket and buy a chicken for £4-5, something like that. But to them, it'd be like 15-20 quid, something like that, for them to buy just a chicken. And it won't be these big ones that we've got today. They'll be like really skinny and horrible. But yeah, they went to her. I said, "Oh, can we buy one of your chickens, please?" She went, "No, it's well, yeah, you can, but it's going to be X amount of francs." And I went, "Well, are you having a laugh, are you?" And they went, "No, that's how much it is." Oh, yeah, well, you can tell the Canadians have been through it if that's what you're charging. So what they did, they waited to the dead of night. They snuck into her backyard, stole one of her chickens, killed it, and knocked on her door the next day and said that their parents had sent them a chicken in the post. And they said, "Oh, if we give you a little bit of money, will you cook this for us, please?" And she was none the wiser. She took it off and cooked it for them.
I love that.
They went off on their way.
Oh, fantastic.
But it's stories like that, It's those sort of memories what they then look on when they go situations and things. So yeah, it's a very mixed emotion when they look back on it.
Because again, like you said, it's a sad time, but at the same time, humans have a way of, like you said, making something good out of something bad.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Tommies were very good at that. Very good at it.
Did the British Army learn and improve its feeding system as the war went on?
They learned a hell of a lot in those 4 years. Because as I said earlier, when we first started on this episode, it was something they'd never done before with that use of technology, and they were having to make it up as they go along, pretty much like the war in itself. They had to make it up as they went along. And there was mistakes, without a shadow of a doubt. There was blokes who weren't getting the right kit. There was problems, especially in 1914 and 1915. But by 1916, those creases and mistakes are starting to be really ironed out. And by 1917, we're starting to see the improvements, and those improvements will get even better. And then by 1918, absolutely flawless. So I said 1917, you got lemons being sent to them on the front line. It's ridiculous. But what I will say about their the supply chain on the Western Front, as good as it was by 1918, by the 11th of November of 1918, it was so far stretched and under pressure, it would have taken a catastrophe of sorts for it to almost collapse, but it was struggling. It was it was quite literally keeping its head above water in 1918, despite of all these innovations, all this extra manpower. But what they were having to do and what they were now able to provide, it was just very, very stretched by that point. But but they learned a hell of a lot.
And how much will that, that experience of the First World War influence catering and rationing during the Second World War?
Quite a bit, because the thing is, when the next war comes along, those former company commanders or junior officers are now running the army by the Second World
Yeah,
War.
of course,
So,
yeah.
where they were a 19-year-old spotty suppleton, they're now not field marshal, but general such and such. They've been in the army for the last 30 years. They've learnt the mistakes of before, because they've been in those conditions. They understand those conditions, and I think they definitely don't want to make the same mistakes that they made in the First World War. And quite luckily, those sort of mistakes are honed in on quite early on, I think, with World War II. But you've also got technology as well, because obviously we've got another industrial revolution happens, and technology comes leaps and bounds in that space of 20 years. Again, every major war, technology just skyrockets, and World War I was no example of that. But from a result of World War I happening, there's this movement in technology again in the last 25 years up to that point of World War II happening. You got things like the Compo will make an appearance, the 48-hour ration pack will make its appearance. So we go 48-hour ration pack down to a 24-hour ration pack, and it'd be packed differently. And there's different things in there, but everything in that ration pack's about 4,500 calories. And it was the same thing that the British soldier was having back in World War I, but more condensed and more preserved. He's not got a big tin of meat in that ration box anymore. He's now got something that's been freeze dried that he adds water to. And then we've got a 10-man compo ration as well, which could just be issued out, and the whole section could just have a good feed on loads of preserved things. Granted, the British Army does like to give fresh food where it can, and that was something with World War I as well, is that the British Army has always tried to give soldiers fresh food where possible, and that was no different with World War I, because fresh is best. And that was something when the Americans came over, they sort of scratched their heads a little bit with the amount of preserved food that they were pushing their soldiers. They go, "What are you doing? You can buy things." But again, it's like war of the longest purse. They're not really thinking about the expense of it. They're just thinking of the practicalities of it.
Mm-hmm. And again, I'd like to bring up the fact that, wars, you learn so much from wars. And then, so say, for instance, technology wise, like, so medical wise, food wise, all these wars that have gone before, they always learn from their mistakes and things are always better. But like you said, technology changes over that time too. So yeah, so it's interesting topic to look at. But looking back, how successful was the British Army in feeding its soldiers under such extreme conditions?
I think it did exceptionally well with the tools that they had, and with how quickly they had to learn as well. It's like I said earlier, it was just second to none. The Army Service Corps had a hard job, and it accomplished its job. There will be those times where certain things weren't going to get to people, priorities weren't as high as priority than other. But they did an outstanding job. Especially when you can stand there and say, well, without a railhead, we can still fight 60 miles into German lines because of the motor transport that we got. So with the aid of motor transport, we can get 60 miles away from a railway siding or a railway head and still get supplies up to the lads up on the front line. You know, so to be for an army to be able to do that's quite an achievement. You know.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. Is there one misconception about World War One food you'd like to clear up, and what would it be?
They were more well fed than what we're led to believe. You know, it just goes to show it's like they were getting citrus. You know, they're getting oranges, they're getting lemons. You know, they've all got to come somewhere. So if they can't get lemons, why can't they get food up to the lads on the line? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, yes, it's monotonous. Yes, it's not very good. But behind the lines, they're eating 3 meals a day, and they're proper meals as well. So the British soldier is far more well fed than what is in popular belief.
Excellent. And what does the story of food tell us about the everyday reality of the Great War?
I think it's a window into their life. I mean, you'll appreciate this, Daz, as a living historian yourself. It's that window into their daily life. So it's more sitting yourself into their shoes, or their boots rather, and knowing what they're eating is to sort of get into the sort of not so much their mental state, but you can see why if you'll read, say, like a context of a regiment, but then you're reading something else regarding, say, that brigade or something like that. But hang on, they're really annoyed. Why are they annoyed? Oh yeah, it's like, look, yeah, they're not eating properly for the last 5 days because there's been intense shelling. So they're literally just been eating corned beef for the last 2 weeks. That's why they're really annoyed, and that's why they're now putting them out the line to get a proper meal inside them. You know, because so I think that's what it does. It's that window into daily life, I think.
Yeah. And why is something as ordinary as a meal so important to understanding how this war was fought?
I believe it's it shows the British Tommy not just as a soldier, but as normal people trying to survive in horrendous conditions and trying to find some comfort, I think, and maintain a sense of normality in their life with the circumstances that they're faced with. I think that's what sort of sums it up for me, as well as logistics as well. You know, that obviously goes without saying. You know, I've been preaching how well they were doing, even with the mistakes that were being made. You know, it was second to none. But yeah, I think for me that's what I would put it down to.
Well, thank you, Pete. And we're going to talk about yourself now. So thank you.
Oh no, you're not talking about me, are you?
Yeah. So thank you for.
I'm shy.
Well, anyway, thank you for telling us about feeding the British Army during World War One. But you, young man, have built yourself quite a following on TikTok, haven't you? And not only that, you're involved in every reenactment going, I think. I don't think
I am
confused over the uniforms.
Oh yeah, I am a bit of a Mr. Ben, I have to say. I do like to put my finger in a lot of pies, or fingers in a lot of pies.
Now, obviously, a lot of your content's World War One related, and obviously food related, from what I've seen. But seriously, mate, it's a fantastic page, and just tell us about how that got started and what made you, take that leap of faith and start a page on TikTok.
So it all started sort of during COVID. So my sort of counterpart, who's he's actually in that picture on the World War with us, the little group photo. He's on my right hand side, which is Steve, and he runs Living History UK, which is another channel on here. And I sort of came on board with him with that. To do some bits and pieces with him, and I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll do my own thing as well, so we could sort of progress it. And that's how it kind of started. I thought, well, what am I going to talk about on my TikTok? And I was like, World War One has always been my passion. I love military history, but World War One is my passion. And I thought, hang on a minute, no one actually knows about the amount of food and the quality of food that they're actually eating, especially behind the lines. Obviously, everyone knows about the monotony of the front line, but those, like I said earlier, that the steak and kidney puddings, the bacon puddings, those good traditional hearty meals that are very traditional in British cuisine today. They were eating, and I think that's the message I wanted to get across, and then also try and dispel some myths along the way as well with sort of my normal this is what they're doing in a trench and all the rest of it.
Yeah, well, you're doing a good job, mate, and yeah, it's fantastic, guys. Please go and check out Pete's Living History on TikTok. I'll make sure that there is a link in the podcast description. Now, the next picture you did get a preview of this one, and you're standing there with my good friend Robert Dixon. But of course, which is very rare because he never goes up the beer tent, in an American Civil War uniform. Now, where do you lie when it comes to interest in the American Civil War?
Yeah, so the American Civil War is my guilty pleasure.
Good man, good man.
It has been for a very long time. I think when was it? So I would have been about, I think I was about 13, I think, when I first sort of discovered the American Civil War. And it was Glory. I watched the film Glory when I was about 14, 13. No, maybe a bit younger than that. Actually, might have been 12. Yeah. Watched Glory, and I was like, what is this? And then found out it was this war that happened in America. And again, started learning about it and found it extremely interesting. Because once you start scratching the surface, it becomes very, very interesting, especially with the British involvement with it. Obviously not military, but like with the volunteers that went over to go and fight for the Union. But yeah, I find the American Civil War extremely interesting. But yeah, I've done a little bit with the Eagles, so I do go and do odds and sods with the American Eagles.
Start with the extreme.
Yeah, but then now most of my stuff's arrived. Now I have posed interest with Rob to go and do some stuff with the Bucktails, which is all part of the Southern Skirmish Association. So hopefully I'll be able to do some bits and pieces as a Bucktail. And obviously I'll do my odds and sods with the Eagles as well.
Yeah, nice one, mate. And that means we'll be able to have a chat around the fire and get drunk together. So
absolutely, yes. Yeah, instead of it must be once a year, honestly.
Yeah. And now, obviously, I had the pleasure of bumping into you at Detlin for the first time, and I'm so glad I did, mate. And I just want to thank you for coming on and telling us all about World War One and your passion.
No,
and your passion shines through, mate. It's an absolute pleasure. It really is. And Pete, all that is left to say, my friend, is cheers.
Cheers.